Very special thanks to Philip Raby Specialist Cars for providing, of course, the Mercedes in this review. And who knows, if you're watching this video close enough to the time of release, this car may even still be for sale. So click the link down in the video description to check out their current stock page. And of course, although they are primarily a Porsche specialist with a ton of after sales and used market care for customers as well, they do occasionally have some pretty specialized stuff in like this as well. It's really not that often that you get the chance to even see an SL65 of this shape, let alone be fortunate enough to drive one and have hands-on experience of what this car feels like. And I don't take that for granted. I do consider it a privilege. Now, with that being said, the question that you probably have is, well, what's it like to drive on an actual road? Because it's not that often that you get to see a vehicle like that on the road. Well, I can confirm it's every bit as nuts as you'd expect it to be, but in all the best ways. In fact, I would put this up there with something like the Litchfield-tuned Nissan GTR, which I reviewed, in terms of being, simply put, terrifyingly fast. I never use the full throttle in this car. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I have no qualms in saying this, I never even came close, because even with using maybe half the throttle that it had on offer, it was more than enough, let me tell you that. And you could feel, even with that little amount of throttle, that due to the sheer power and torque, the back end of this car could break loose really, really easy. So straight off the bat, don't be fooled into thinking that, oh, it's a Mercedes, it weighs over 2 tons, it's a convertible, surely it's an obscenely overpowered poser's car. Well, no, no it really isn't, because what this actually is a Frankenstein car with an official backer behind it. It's the kind of thing which would usually be some kind of wacky harebrained conversion from some nutjob garage who just wanted to make a crazy car, except Mercedes AMG made it themselves. It's a literal supercar tier engine in a cabrio with 2 seats, which is perfectly capable enough already in, for instance, SL500 form at being a really good sports car, but it just wasn't enough for AMG. They said, you know what, let's slap a 6-litre V12 into it. But wait, there's more, because we're going to bi-turbo that 6-litre V12 with the same kind of 5-speed auto setup that the SLR McLaren has. We're not going to give you all-wheel drive to help you out. It doesn't really have much, if any, downforce to work with, and apart from its weight, there's really nothing much holding you to the road at all. And the most succinct way to describe the way this car feels, in my opinion, is it's kind of a German Dodge Viper, because it really feels that ridiculously over the top, but it's infectious to drive. It's also very intimidating, because unlike the insanely fast Litchfield Nissan GTR, which I reviewed on the channel, which was terrifyingly fast in the best way, this one, unlike the GTR, really doesn't do any of the work for you. You don't have all-wheel drive to save you. It doesn't feel like the computers are constantly making all of the necessary adjustments to keep you alive. It really does feel like almost an old-school sports car with an engine that's almost too big for its own good. In fact, it outclasses the SLR McLaren of the same kind of time period in many ways. It's a bigger engine, it has more cylinders, almost as much power, and way more torque, because the actual numbers on this are nuts. As I said, it's a 6-litre bi-turbo V12, but it has 603 brake horsepower, which these days, of course, you can surpass in a number of vehicles, but in around 2004, when you could first see this car on the road, that was a nuts number to be working with. That really is rivaling Carrera GTs and SLRs, but it's that torque figure which takes it from crazy territory to borderline obscene territory. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, the Dodge Viper, one of the biggest, craziest engine cars you can buy, with an 8+ litre V10, the quintessential obscene sports car choice, has 800 Newton meters of torque, 814 to be exact. This has 1,000 Newton meters of torque, 738 pound-feet. The same as a Pagani Huayras AMG engine. In fact, it shares a lot of similarities to the Huayras engine. Both are 6 litres, both are V12s, both turbo-aspirated, and the same amount of torque. But of course, the Pagani has a clear advantage in terms of sheer horsepower, but again, not really a fair comparison with that one being a couple of $1 million. That brings me to the value, because this is another crazy thing about the SL65 for the moment. And watch this space, because if you watch this video a few years down the line, don't be surprised if this price seems like a steal, because this is currently for sale, incidentally the only one of its kind on Auto Trader, for 45 grand. Now that, regardless of the time period, is a nuts price for what was a 150 grand car to begin with, which is still half the price of an SLR at the time. I believe that within the next decade, this is going to double at least in value. I foresee this being 90, 100 grand easily, if not a lot more, because it's just got that kind of extremely rare, super collectible, early 2000s unicorn iconic vibe to it. Very much so what I would describe, in fact, as kind of the Jaguar XJ220 effect, wherein about 15 years ago, you couldn't give one away. I've still got issues of car magazines with Jag XJ220s in the classifieds for barely 100 grand. Good luck finding one for that these days. They're like 4 times that at least. This, I believe, is going to have a price jump of potentially massive proportions in the relatively near future. Because if you really think about it, it literally is a sports car with the potential to be a long-distance GT and the engine of a supercar. You put those things together and there just really aren't that many rivals to this on the market. The straight line performance is so fast that honestly it feels like you're never even scratching 25% of what this car is capable of. And this is one of the very few vehicles I've driven, including something like that GTR, wherein if you asked me to take this vehicle on the motorway or the highway for our American friends and maybe get it up to a cruising speed of 90 or 100 miles an hour and then dared me to floor it, I don't think I would. Because even at that speed, based on these speeds that I was doing, it just feels like the car would immediately be in all 3 lanes of the motorway from sheer wheel spin. It's that kind of machine. It really is barely believable levels of power and torque that this thing is working with. And the fact that it only has 5 gears tells you a lot about the confidence Mercedes has in the car, because honestly, it doesn't need more. If this thing had 7 or 8 gears, it really wouldn't feel any more torquey than it already is, because of course the purpose of a gearbox, put simply, is to give you the maximum ideal amount of torque at any given moment based on revs and the kind of performance that you're trying to get out of the car. The fact that this only has 5 to work with is because it has so much sheer torque, it just doesn't need more gears. In fact, you could probably fit this with a 2 or 3 speed from the 1960s and it would still destroy most sports cars in a straight line. Now, as it happens, the fantastic engineering doesn't just make it a speed machine. I actually found that even the fuel economy wasn't that bad. And of course, I'm not going to linger on that because who really cares in the grand scheme of things. But incidentally, I got about an average of 17 to the gallon out of it, according to the heads-up display. The, official online specs are more like, oh, it will do 29 on the highway and average 21. Yeah, sure it will. Sure it will. But 17 isn't bad at all for what it is. And again, this brings me back to what I believe is the important question to ask about a car that's so unique, such as this one is. Because tell me a rival for this in the comments, because there really aren't many if you think about it. Some might come to mind. You might say Aston DBS, maybe Bentley Continental GT, perhaps even something like a 911 Turbo or a Nissan GTR. But really, none of them are that close to what this is, being a pure sports car with GT tendencies, but not really a full-on GT car because it doesn't have 4 seats. And then a supercar level engine. There aren't many which tick all of those boxes, and even the ones that do don't have this kind of rarity. I mean, that sort of machine is almost like describing something like a Lister Storm under most circumstances, not a convertible from Mercedes. But as I was saying, the type of buyer I believe for this car is something which most of you probably won't want to hear, but I think it's probably the most valid type of buyer who does need to hear this, because I don't think this is the kind of car for somebody who's maybe considering something like an Aston DB9, maybe a Jag XKR, an XKRS, maybe a Porsche 911 Turbo or a Nissan GTR. Maybe a slightly older driver, they want something that's really fast but capable over long distances, pretty comfortable, pretty smooth, very elegant. This is a really tempting choice within that category. The problem, I think, is it's so fast, so overwhelmingly powerful and torquey, that I think this is the kind of car that you could buy, drive it once, and be so terrified to ever use it again that you end up keeping it in the garage most of the time. And to me, that is the kind of buyer who needs to buy it. Somebody looking for an investment. And I hate to say that, because I hate to ever say buy a car and don't use it, but to me this seems like it deserves that kind of treatment. It's a car which, let's face it, you cannot use all of its potential on any public road, including the Autobahn, and yet it is almost guaranteed to increase in value. So if you can keep it in really good condition and maybe just drive it occasionally as this insane toy that it is, then I think you could potentially have yourself a really, really good investment for the future. It essentially is a supercar in everything but name. It can run rings around most other sports cars. There are barely any other convertibles, certainly from its time, that even come close to how fast it is. And even by today's standards, it's terrifyingly fast. And yet it came out in around 2004. The icing on the cake for the SL65 of this shape in particular really is that even if you can find something which comes close to rivaling it, most of them probably don't cost £45,000. Consider the SLR, that is probably its closest rival from its own family. That's worth what, £600,000 now? So not exactly a comparable price. This is a pretty unique vehicle at what I consider to be a really good price at the moment, and who knows how much they could skyrocket in future. I certainly don't see a car like this going down in price anytime soon. Overall though, it was a fantastic experience, and I'm glad to say, very grateful as well to say, that for all of its insane straight line ability, it handles itself really well through corners as well, and the brakes, again, thankfully, are tremendously powerful. There have actually been more than a few occasions where I've driven a fast car and been maybe a little bit underwhelmed by the brakes. This is not one of those occasions. The brakes are absolutely fantastic on this car. Great driver feedback, really smooth and very, very powerful, which for a over 2-ton rear-wheel drive 600 horsepower monster, you would kind of hope they would be. And again, the brakes have aged very well given the age of the car. So overall, it's a very unique vehicle, even by today's standards, and I believe a great investment for the future. The handling is smooth, it's no track day toy by any stretch, but it's a continent-crushing monster with an engine which is almost too good for its own right. And it's certainly, as I said, a very unique approach at doing something like this. Something which almost feels like a one-off, like a show car of some kind, a concept of just Mercedes AMG flexing their muscles. Except in this case, it's flexing the muscles until their shirt bursts, because it's so over the top. But that's it overall for my thoughts on the SL65. Of course, give me your thoughts down below. What do you think of this car? Do you think the newer ones can match up to it? Do you think the black edition is as cool, or is that just me? Overall though, of course, click the playlist here on screen to see my other car reviews on the channel, and obviously stick around for more in future. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.